So, namaskar friends and welcome once again. In the last class we discussed ethical communication. Now, we have understood by now that communication is not about the ability to speak and share without other considerations. So, there have been communications that have failed, and as a result they have had disastrous consequences. So, in this particular lecture I am going to talk about some of such ancient stories that talk about improper communication and its consequences and call for developing a communication which is not only ethical, but also takes into consideration what is desired, what is expected of us in a given situation. So, first of all again we talk about the assembly hall scene, Draupadi in the Sabha. This is a clear case of workplace harassment and institutional complicity. So, time and again I am telling you that it is not about what you communicate, but also about how you communicate it. You need to know what kind of communication has to be done, what is desired, what is not desired. A communication which has to be free from any kind of bias of caste, creed or gender or any kind of bias for that matter. Let us consider and look at this particular episode in the Mahabharata, Draupadi's humiliation in the Kuru Sabha, which is best read not merely as an act of individual violence, but as a case of institutionalized gendered power operating under the cover of legality. Her staking after the dice game exposes how procedural validity can be weaponized to normalize ethical violence, a dilemma deeply relevant to modern workplaces. Well, the patriarchal society thinks that the women are also commodities to be bartered, to be sold and to be staked. But is this just a kind of injustice done to Draupadi, or is it something that smacks of institutional complicity? The deeper crisis lies in the collective failure of governance structures. Bhisma, Drona and Dhritarashtra, they all embody senior leadership that recognizes the wrong, yet chooses procedural hesitation over moral intervention. This mirrors today's failures in POS committees, HR escalation and board level silence. So, these kind of problems are still found in our professional world. Draupadi's questioning transforms victimhood into ethical resistance by asking whether Yudhiṣṭhira had any right to stake her after losing himself. She shifts the discussion from personal humiliation to juridical legitimacy and bodily autonomy. So, a kind of communication which is directed against an entire gender or entire people without showing any kind of intent on improvement is certainly not which is expected. The episode critically illuminates how organizations often fail less because of the aggressor and more because systems privilege reputation, hierarchy and procedural ambiguity over justice. In many cases we find that institutions suppress such excesses for fear of losing their name and fame. No, this is not the right thing. It foregrounds assertive dissent, legal literacy and the courage to challenge abusive authority structures. But what Draupadi does here, she does not succumb to this institutional complicity. Rather, she stands against that and questions it, resists it. So, friends, this is also one of the learnings for us, that if we are met with injustice, we have every right to stand, question and fight. So, this episode demonstrates that silence by those in power converts isolated misconduct into systemic culture. Harassment becomes institutional when systems ask whether the rule was followed before asking whether dignity was violated. Fine. So, the insight is that harassment becomes institutional when systems ask whether the rule was followed before asking whether dignity was violated. You know, it is not about rule, it is also about dignity. So, that kind of sensitivity, that kind of prioritization is needed. The Sabha fails not because one man violates dignity, but because the institution converts violence into procedure. We have the likes of Bhisma, Drona, and everybody is keeping silent there. That means the institution also joins in this insult of Draupadi. Another example is that of Aṣhṭāvakra in Janak's court, confidence beyond social perception. Na tvam deho na te deho bhokta karta nava bhavan chitropo asi sada sakshi nirapeksha sukham chara. That means you are not the body nor its roles, you are pure consciousness, the witness, move freely. What can we learn from this episode in King Janak's court when Aṣhṭāvakra, and Aṣhṭāvakra by its very understanding is a deformed body which has at least 8 visible markers of deformity. When Aṣhṭāvakra enters King Janak's court and the assembled scholars laugh at his body bent in 8 places, the ridicule is immediate, showing how society is instinctively judged by surface appearance, age and bodily conformity rather than inner competence. Friends, we always judge people by how they look. We need to understand that the bodily features do not really tell us about the competence of a person. Aṣhṭāvakra is different to look at, and that is why all the scholars who have gathered in the court of King Janak laugh at him, believing that like his body shape, he may also be equally incompetent. But Aṣhṭāvakra's genius lies in his refusal to absorb their gaze. Instead of becoming defensive, he exposes the court's intellectual poverty by suggesting that those who see only skin behave like cobblers who know leather but not wisdom. So, friends, there will be situations where you will be judged and you will have to counter that with your wisdom. This makes the episode profoundly relevant to body shaming, disability prejudice, academic imposter syndrome, public speaking anxiety and confidence in elite spaces. There are situations when we judge people not by what they are inwardly or what they possess, but based on their outward appearance. So, we should not discriminate people based on their body shape, their appearance and the visible markers of their genius or otherwise. The soft skill lesson is that confidence is not the absence of judgment, but the refusal to let judgment define identity. So, who is confident? A man who is self assured is not deterred by criticism made by other people, because that does not define their character. They are strong enough, confident enough to face it and give their best. So, real confidence comes from knowing what you carry within, not from controlling how others see you. we have many a time seen we have little control over how people pass their judgment on us, but certainly if we are strong enough from within, we can always tackle such criticism. Aṣhṭāvakra's dialogue with Janak transforms the court from a place of external judgment into a space of inner inquiry and self realization. Aṣhṭāvakra changes the perception of the people sitting there. Their exchange later becomes the Aṣhṭāvakra Gita, one of the most radical texts on selfhood. Aṣhṭāvakra thus becomes an extraordinary model for confidence under ridicule, speaking from mastery and converting stigma into authority. So, friends, as good confident communicators, you need to fight out this kind of judgmental gaze from others. Be strong inwardly to show your real confidence and what you possess. Another example, a classic example, is the Ekalavya's thumb, gatekeeping, exclusion and politics of talent, which continues to haunt even now. Every now and then we see that the talent is ignored in favor of somebody who has some kind of source. Ekalavya's offering of his thumb is a defining epic moment for discussing institutional gatekeeping and the suppression of outsider talent. He is denied formal access, yet through discipline and self-learning becomes exceptional. Well, all of us know that Dronacharya does not teach him anything, still he has become an archer par excellence. The critical issue is not only Drona's refusal, but later demand for the thumb, which reveals how systems sometimes preserve elite hierarchy by disabling merit rather than nurturing it. This directly mirrors modern spaces where highly capable individuals are excluded because they lack the right network, background, pedigree or organizational sponsorship. Great institutions fall when they protect legacy privilege over emerging talent. For personality development, Ekalavya becomes a model of discipline, intrinsic motivation and self-directed mastery, but also a warning against systems that punish excellence from the margins. So, friends, this is again something that can be learned, that through our self discipline and intrinsic motivation and self directed desire to achieve something exceptional, we need not to depend on institutional support all the time, rather we can build institutions on our own. Another example that may be discussed here is Karna's dilemma. Karna is one of the most powerful characters in the Mahabharata, but multidimensional as well. His life embodies the modern conflict between personal loyalty and ethical judgment. He knows that Duryodhana is wrong, he is not fighting for dharma, but again he has to balance between his personal loyalty to him and his ethical judgment, and it is not a simple choice to make. His gratitude towards Duryodhana is emotionally valid, yet it repeatedly binds him to institutional wrong and moral compromise. His deepest tragedy is that his virtues of gratitude, loyalty and honor become the very instruments of his moral downfall. Well, he does not choose wrongly out of ignorance, but out of conscious attachment to a loyalty structure he knows is ethically compromised. So, the situation is such that he cannot choose anybody else, even if he knows that he is on the wrong side, he cannot help it. The soft skill here is ethical discernment under relational pressure. So, how can we make ethical choices if we are under this kind of relational pressure? Let us say you are a judge and your son is being brought for some kind of complaint, and you know that your son is someone who has committed the crime, but you do not pass judgment. Why? Because you are overcome by your own personal attachment to your son. Obviously, this will be a moment of ethical dilemma and you will think what to do, and this is precisely what happens with Karna as well. The leadership lesson is that loyalty must be governed by values, not merely by personal debt. You should not be loyal to somebody even if you know that somebody is wrong, rather you should always look at the merit of it. Another example is Yudhiṣṭhira and in the dice game risk, pressure and boundary failure. Yudhiṣṭhira's repeated participation in the dice game reflects poor risk judgment and inability to withdraw from a destructive situation. Well friends, we always alarm you from taking impulsive decisions. If you take decisions on impulse, you are likely to make mistakes. A person like Yudhiṣṭhira again accepts the game of dice challenge thrown to him by Sakuni and Duryodhan a second time, although in the first time he has been humiliated. The episode is highly relevant to peer pressure, impulsive commitments, bad investments and decision making under ego pressures. We should not ever do that because that will spoil us. His fall begins not with ignorance, but with the inability to establish healthy limits and refusal boundaries. The soft skill lesson is decision discipline, restraint and knowing when to disengage. Many a time friends, we do not say no at the right time to our boss and the boss starts taking advantage of that. When we feel like saying no, it is already too late, and that is why this is very important. When you are taking a decision, discipline is also needed. If you have taken a wrong decision, you should learn lessons from that and should not repeat it in future. So, the leadership lesson is that one flawed decision at the top can endanger the dignity and security of the whole institution. Who is Yudhiṣṭhira? The eldest of the Pandavas, their king, and he has the responsibility of his entire clan, and he takes this wrong decision without consulting anybody and it brings them to naught, and then they suffer a lot because of this. Fine. So, intelligence must be supported by self control and situational awareness. His brothers believe in him, they believe his judgment, knowing that Yudhiṣṭhira is very wise. But what does Yudhiṣṭhira do? He lacks that self control and situational awareness and falls a prey to the evil mechanisms of Duryodhana and Sakuni and is trapped in that. So, friends, we need not to be impulsive in our decision making, rather we continue to learn from our decisions, and if a decision goes wrong, not to repeat it. Another case in point is Bhisma, one of the most towering figures in the Mahabharata, but then we find that he suffers ethical paralysis and again is a case of failure of great leadership. He represents one of the most tragic leadership paradoxes in the Mahabharata, the very virtues that make him great. Vow, Bhisma Pratigya, all of us know. He has taken a vow that throughout his life he will remain a celibate and will also protect the throne of Hastinapur, and he does that even when Hastinapur is governed not by an ethical king, but a king who plays partisan politics, a king who takes immoral, unethical decisions. So, the virtues that he imbibes in him, vow, discipline, loyalty and institutional commitment, they also become the conditions of his ethical failure. Why? Because his silence in Draupadi's Sabha is only one manifestation of a larger pattern. Earlier he witnesses the deepening injustice toward the Pandavas, the normalization of Duryodhana's arrogance and the steady collapse of Kuru political ethics, yet repeatedly chooses preservation of throne over correction of power. So, again we find that such virtues do not yield a result that is expected. This makes Bhisma a profound case study and vow entrapment. How you have taken one vow and you are trapped forever in that. An old commitment, once noble, hardens into a structure that prevents response to changing ethical realities. What begins as integrity slowly becomes rigidity. So, friends, if we look at it from the modern point of view, we are living in a highly dynamic world. The world is changing so fast. If we have committed to ourselves, and I have seen some of the friends, this really sounds weird at time, they still do not carry mobile phone. They say no, 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 I have taken a resolution that I will not use mobile phone. What rubbish! Mobile phone was not there earlier, that is why you are not using it. Now it is there, make use of it, because this is a need of the hour. Fine. So, if you have taken some decision and later on you find out that that decision does not work anymore, you need to reconsider that decision rather than being too rigid about it. The deeper soft skill lesson in this case is not merely courage, but the ability to revive one's own vows, frameworks and inherent loyalties when they begin to protect injustice. And this is what is missing in the case of Bhisma. Another very important example is that of Harishchandra. He is called Satya Raja Harishchandra, an epitome of truth. Whenever we talk about somebody speaking the truth or standing for truth, even despite all adverse conditions, we call him Raja Harishchandra. Harishchandra's defining ethical moment emerges after losing his kingdom, wealth and family, when he works as the keeper of the cremation ground, and there is a ghat named after him in Varanasi, Harishchandra Ghat, and that is also a cremation ghat. We find that he works at Dome Raja and he has been entrusted with the responsibility to charge some fee from everybody who comes for cremation. Now, we find how Harishchandra has lost everything, has given everything in charity, and at last he has been working as a gatekeeper at that cremation ground, and there we find that even under such pressing circumstances, he refuses to compromise on his duty. We find the most poignant thing happening. His wife arrives carrying the dead body of his son, but she does not have money for the last rites. He insists that the required fee must still be paid. Rather than bowing down to his emotional vulnerability, he chooses duty over his emotions. This transforms the story from simple honesty into a profound case of integrity under extreme personal loss. Truth is no longer abstract virtue, it becomes a value tested against grief, attachment and emotional collapse. So, friends, as leaders, as practitioners of communication, you will be presented with such trying moments and critical situations, and there obviously your integrity will be tested. The modern relevance is immense. Professionals often claim ethics until it threatens promotion, relationships, finances or institutional survival. Whenever people feel that their integrity will harm them financially or career wise, they make compromises. Credibility is built not when truth is easy, but when it becomes costly. The deeper critical question for today is whether the institutions reward such integrity or quietly punish those who refuse compromise. We need to look at it. There are moments when we realize that we have been passed over in job promotions for a lesser qualified candidate because the candidate happened to be closer to the authority. So, what to do? Should we make compromises and we will again start behaving like that employee ourselves to ensure promotion, or should we stand firm and do not compromise on our values? Another example is Ratnakar to Vālmīki, the transformation. This is the biggest transformation stories. The courage to rebuild identity, the most defining phase of Vālmīki's life begins not as a sage but as a Ratnakar, a forest rover who lived through violence and survival driven choices. All of us know that before writing Ramayana, Vālmīki was a robber. How did he transform into one of the biggest sages? That is a very inspiring story. Later traditions narrate that his turning point came when he encountered the sage Narad, who asked a devastatingly simple question. And what was that question? Would his family share the burden of his sins as they shared the fruits of his actions? When Ratnakar discovers that no one is willing to share his moral burden, he confronts a profound truth of personality. Responsibility cannot be outsourced. Now, this is a very powerful line, dear friends. Your responsibility is your responsibility. You cannot pass it on to others. This moment of self recognition becomes the beginning of transformation. Narad then gives him a mantra. Ratnakar enters long tapas, repeating Mara Mara, which gradually becomes Ram Ram, symbolizing how disciplined repetition can convert destruction into devotion. So, initially he is not chanting Rama Rama, it is Mara Mara, but then in the long run he becomes Maharshi Vālmīki. Anthills grow around him, and from the Vālmīka, these anthills, they are called Vālmīka, he emerges as Vālmīki, the renewed self. This is one of the finest examples of identity reconstruction. The old self is not denied, but transcended through reflection, discipline and practice. So, friends, it is not always needed for you to leave behind your value system in order to create a new identity. Rather, you can refashion yourself, with self realization, reflection, discipline and practice. So, the soft skill lesson is self correction and growth mindset transforms you forever. The ability to accept that the self can be consciously rewritten. You need to understand this, that the ability to adapt to changing realities and change accordingly is one of the biggest virtues that will sustain your continued professional success in today's world. So, greatness often begins the moment one stops blaming circumstances and starts owning choices. Friends, our problem is that we always try to find fault with things rather than looking inward, making corrections within. नाचना आवे आंगन टेढ़ा, that is what people say. जब नाचने नहीं आ रहा है तो हम ब्लेम करते हैं कि आंगन ही टेढ़ा है, कैसे करेंगे. So, rather than blaming it on the circumstances, situations, institutions, why don't we make course correction in ourselves? Vālmīki becomes a model of reinvention beyond guilt, labels and social memory. So, let us conclude this discussion with this. Udhare dat mana atmanam, let one lift oneself by oneself. Only you can decide how you can transform yourself. So, all these examples make us wiser as leaders and communicators. Thank you very much, dear friends. I am so thankful to you for your kind attention and look forward to the next lecture. Thank you very much.